The Indian Struggle Part 7, The Anti-Climax 1922. It is not possible at this distant date to understand how profoundly the people of India believed in 1921 that Swaraj would be won before the end of that year. Even the most sophisticated people shared this optimism. I remember listening once to the speech of an able Bengali advocate at a public meeting in 1921, in the course of which the asserted in all seriousness, "We are surely going to get Swaraj before the year is out. If you ask me how we are going to win it, I cannot answer, but we are going to win it all the same." On another occasion, in 1921, I was discussing with an exceptionally able Calcutta politician some instructions issued by the Mahatma. He had declared that all funds at the disposal of Congress should be spent before the end of the year and that nothing should be left over for the next. To a normal rational mind, this seemed improper, but defending the Mahatma, this friend said, "We have deliberately chosen not to look beyond December 31st. All this may appear now as a madness. Nevertheless, it gives some idea of exuberance, of native enthusiasm and optimism, and that had taken possession of the country that year. With the dawn of the year 1922, a special effort was made by the Mahatma to wipe up public enthusiasm. It was therefore decided to proceed to the last item in his plan, namely the non-payment of taxes. On February 1st, 1922, he sent an ultimatum to the Viceroy, Lord Reading, saying that if within 7 days the government did not demonstrate a change of heart, he would commence a general non-payment of taxes in Bardoli subdivision in Gujarat. It was reported that in Bardoli subdivision there were many people who had worked with Mahatma Gandhi in the passive resistance movement in South Africa and had acquired experience in work of that kind. The beginning of the non-tax campaign in Bardoli would be the signal for starting a similar campaign all over the country. Elaborate arrangements were also made to start a no-tax campaign in Bengal simultaneously, and the United Provinces and Andhra were also well prepared for a campaign of that sort. The ultimatum of the Mahatma threw the whole country into a fever of excitement. With bated breath, everybody began to count the hours as they sped by. Suddenly there came a bolt from the blue which left the people speechless and dumbfounded. That was the incident at the Chauri Chaura. On February 4th, at a place called Chauri Chaura in the United Provinces, the villagers in a fit of exasperation set fire to the police station and killed some policemen. When this news reached the Mahatma, he was horrified at the turn of events and immediately summoned a meeting of the Congress Working Committee at Bardoli. At this instance, the committee decided to suspend the civil disobedience movement entirely throughout India for an indefinite period, and all congressmen were enjoined to confine themselves to peaceful, constructive work. The constructive program included hand spinning and hand waving, removal of untouchability, promotion of intercommunal unity, suppression of the drug traffic, extension of national education, suppression of litigation, and establishment of arbitration boards without voluntarily violating any law or governmental ordinance existing at the time. The dictator's decree was obeyed at the time, but there was a regular revolt in the Congress camp. No one could understand why Mahatma should have used the isolated incident at Chauri Chaura for strangling the movement all over the country. Popular resentment was all the greater because the Mahatma had not cared to consult representatives from the different provinces, and because the situation in the country as a whole was exceedingly favorable for the success of civil disobedience movement. To sound the order of retreat just when public enthusiasm was reaching the boiling point was nothing short of national calamity. The principal lieutenants of Mahatma, Deshbandhu Das, Pandit Motilal Nehru, and Lala Rajpat Rai, who were all in a prison, shared the popular resentment. I was with Deshbandhu at the time, and I could see that he was beside himself with anger and sorrow at the way Mahatma Gandhi was repeatedly burgling. He was just beginning to forget the December blunder when the Bardoli retreat came as a staggering blow. Lala Rajpat Rai was experiencing the same feelings, and it is reported that sheer disgusting he addressed a 70-page letter to the Mahatma from prison. In semi-official circles, another explanation has been given of to the sudden volte-face of the Mahatma. It is alleged that elaborate arguments had been made by the government in a secret to render his no-tax campaign at Bardoli a debacle, and that a large portion of the next installment of taxes had been already collected. Official circles sympathetic to the Mahatma conveyed secret information to him regarding the countermeasures adopted by the government and warned him of the possibility of a failure in case he launched the campaign. When Mahatma Gandhi was brought face to face with this fact, he realized the hopelessness of the situation, and thinking that without a successful campaign at Bardoli he could not work up the movement in the country, he decided to use the Chori Chora incident as a pretext for calling off the civil disobedience movement. Those who know Mahatma more intimately will not, however, accept this explanation. While the followers were fretting and fuming against the dictator, the astute ex-Lord Chief Justice of England was not idle. Throughout 1921, he had given the Mahatma a long rope, but since the Ahmedabad Congress, he began to look for an opportunity for putting a stop to his activities. In his weekly paper, Young India, the Mahatma had written some articles, the finest he has ever written, and which will rank for all time among his inspired writings, which the government held to be seditious. They could therefore arrest him and get him sentenced to a long term of imprisonment. But the point they had to consider was what the effect of such an action would be on the masses who idolized the Mahatma. Lord Reading, it was reported, was genuinely afraid that in spite of all non-violence which the dictator preached, his arrest would be followed by widespread disorder, rioting and bloodshed. And coming after Lord Chelmsford, under whose regime the Amritsar massacres had been taken place, he had no desire to repeat the terrible events of 1919. He was therefore anxiously and nervously looking for an opportunity to strike at the Mahatma when the latter himself took a step which had a depressing effect all over the country and produced a revolt within the Congress itself. That was the proper psychological movement for Lord Reading to act. If the only Secretary of State for India, Mr. Montagu, would not stand in his way, fortunately for the Government of India, early in March, owing to differences with the cabinet in England, Mr. Montagu was forced to resign. The last obstacle was therefore removed, and on March 10, 1922, Mahatma Gandhi was made a prisoner. The trial of Mahatma Gandhi was an historic event. In describing the trial proceedings, Desbandhu Chittaranjan Das, in his presidential speech at the Gaya Congress in December 1922, drew an analogy with the trial of Christ before Pontius Pilate. A similar comparison was also drawn by the well-known YMCA leader, the late Mr. K.T. Paul. In the trial, the Mahatma, who described himself as a farmer and a weaver, made a lengthy statement describing how, from a staunch loyalist and cooperator, I have become an uncompromising defectionist and non-cooperator. And he ended his statement with these words: "The only course open to you, the judge and the assessors, is either to resign your post and thus disassociate yourselves from evil if you feel that the law you are called upon to administer is an evil and that in reality I am innocent, or to inflict on me the severest penalty if you believe that the system and the law you are assisting to administer are good for the people of this country and that my activity is therefore injurious to the public will." The English judge, Mr. Bloomfield, sentenced him to 6 years imprisonment. The resignation of Mr. Montagu was an indication of the growing power of conservatives in the coalition cabinet of Mr. Lloyd George, the premier. Under the pressure from the Tory members, Mr. Lord George delivered in August his famous steel frame speech, in which he described the civil service as the steel frame of the Indian administration, which must remain British, no matter what other changes may overtake India. This speech caused widespread resentment in India, because people were looking forward to the day when the power and the emoluments of the civil service would be curtailed and the public given thereby a due place in the administration of their country. About this time, Lord Winston, the new Under Secretary of State for India, visited India. One of the purposes of his visit was to herald a new policy with regard to the Indian princes and ruling chiefs. The year before, when the Prince of Wales visited India, he had noticed a great difference between his reception in British India and in Indian states. In British India, his visit had been boycotted by the public, whereas the states he had no such unpleasant experience. Since that moment, the British government were led to adopt a new attitude towards the princes, an attitude of greater friendship and cordiality. The princes, on their part, utilized the occasion for persuading the government of India to introduce legislation with a view to suppressing hostile agitation and propaganda conducted against the princes from British India. Accordingly, in September 1922, a bill was introduced in the Assembly called the Indian States Bill. The bill was thrown out by the Assembly, but the Viceroy certified it as urgent and necessary, and it became law. It is noteworthy in this connection that the new Under Secretary of State for India, Lord Winton, in his conferences with the Viceroy and the governors of Bombay, Madras and Bengal, advocated his new attitude towards the princes, and after his visit, representatives of Government of India began to sing praises of the princes whenever a suitable opportunity presented itself. In October, there was a general election in England. The coalition government broke up and the Conservatives came into power with Mr. Bonar Law at their head, and with Viscount Peel and Lord Winton as Secretary and Under Secretary of State for India respectively. The next month, Sir Basil Blackett was sent out to India as the finance minister to the Government of India. The current reaction began to grow stronger and stronger in India. The Indian liberal leaders who under under the influence of Mr. Montagu, had been led to work the constitution and to accept office as ministers, found their position increasingly difficult. Sir Tej Bahadur Sapru had already resigned from the Viceroy's Executive Council in April, following the resignation of Mr. Montagu in March. And in March 1923, when the situation became unbearable for him, Mr. Chintamani, the Minister of Education in the United Provinces, resigned. During the whole of 1922, the only decent acts which the government did was to concede the demands of the people in Midnapur district in Bengal and of the Akali Sikhs in Punjab. In Midnapur, the new village self-government Act, as a protest against which the no tax campaign had been started, was withdrawn, and in Punjab a new law was passed under which all the Sikh shrines were taken out of the control of the Mahants and handed over to the popular committees. We must now interrupt our narrative and inquire as to what the leaders had been doing in the meantime. In the first week of December 1921, Lala Rajpat Rai and most of his principal colleagues had been rounded up by the police at a meeting of the Punjab Congress Committee. A few days later, Deshbandhu Das and most of his colleagues, including the Secretary of Bengal Congress Committee, Mr. B.N. Sasmal, and myself, had been placed under arrest. Following this, Mr. Pandit Motilal Nehru and most of the important congressmen in the United Provinces had been clapped into the prison. According to the rules of non-cooperation, no congressman could put up a defense before a British court of law. Consequently, everywhere the prosecution had a easy task. Most of the trials would not last more than a few minutes, and the same magistrate would dispose of hundreds of cases in one afternoon. In the case of Deshbandhu Das, however, the trial dragged on for 2 months, and since Mr. Sasmal and I had been made co-accused in the same case, we had to suffer the agony of a uselessly long trial. It was freely talked about at the time that in view of the prestige and influence commanded by the Deshbandhu, the magistrate was unwilling to convict him without some show of legality. Time was therefore given again and again to the prosecution to collect the evidence to prepare their case against him. The prosecution case rested on certain notices alleged to have been signed by him, which were in violation of the government proclamation banning as illegal all volunteer organization. Those who worked in the office of the Bengal Congress Committee knew as a matter of fact that these notices had not been signed by him. Nevertheless, the official expert in handwriting gave evidence on oath that the signatures were genuinely of Deshbandhu, and on the strength of this so-called expert evidence, he was convicted and sentenced to 6 months imprisonment. These as well as other illegalities relating to his arrest were pointed out in a statement made by him before the court towards the end of his trial, in the course of which he sought to prove that the government never hesitate to break the law when it suits their own purpose. Before a sentence was passed, a message was sent on behalf of the prosecution saying that if he accepted the Bardoli resolution regarding the suspension of civil disobedience, the government would set him free at once. But he refused to entertain any such proposal. Soon after our conviction, we were transferred to another prison in Calcutta, the Alipur Central Jail, where we had an opportunity of meeting representatives from all the districts in Bengal. Except among the orthodox followers of Mahatma, who were in a minority, the general feeling was one of the resentment at the Bardoli decision. This feeling was directed more against the Mahatma, since he was the dictator of All India Congress Committee and the Bardoli resolution had been passed at his instance. Accepting the Bardoli retreat as an accomplished fact, the Deshbandhu tried to devise means for rousing public enthusiasm once again by a change in tactics. He thus conceived of his plan of non-cooperation within the legislatures. According to this plan, congressmen, instead of boycotting the election, would stand as candidates at the polls, and after capturing the elected seats, would carry on a policy of uniform, continuous and consistent opposition to the government. The boycott of the legislatures as conceived by the Calcutta Congress in 1920 had proved to be a failure. While the nationalists had kept away from the legislatures and undescribables had captured those bodies, these people, instead of assisting the popular movement in the country, had lent their support to the government. Though their help, the government was able to demonstrate to the world that in their policy of repression, they had the support of the elected members of the legislatures. According to the Deshbandhu, in a revolutionary fight, the points of vantage should not be left in the hands of the enemy. Therefore, all elected seats in the legislature, as also in all public bodies, should be captured by the congressmen. Where there rooms for doing any solid constructive work, they could do so, but failing that, they could at least keep up systematic opposition to the members and agents of the government, and thereby prevent them from the doing mischief. Further, the elections campaign would give the Congress an occasion and opportunity for doing its own propaganda simultaneously all over the country. The adoption of this new policy did not imply that they were to abandon any of other activities of the Congress, but simply meant an extension of those activities to include capture of the elected seats in the legislatures and all public bodies. Discussions regarding the new plan were carried on vigorously from day to day in the Alipur Central Jail. It soon appeared that in all these discussions, the main contention of the opponents was that the Government of India Act 1919 hardly left any room for useful opposition within the legislatures. Owing to the presence of Britishers and other members nominated by the government, it was difficult, if not impossible, for the elected members to secure a majority either in Indian Legislative Assembly or in the provincial legislatures. Further, the Viceroy in the case of the former and the governors in the case of the latter had powers of veto and certification, whereby they could always override the decision of the legislatures. The reply to this was that even if the elected members did not have a majority, they could still keep up continuous opposition against the government and thereby strengthen the agitation outside the legislatures. Secondly, it would be possible for the elected members to secure a majority in at least some of the legislatures, and if the Viceroy or the governor set aside the decision of any legislature, the government would stand condemned before the bar of public opinion both inside India and outside. Lastly, under the existing constitution, a vote against the ministers or their departments could not be overridden by the governor of any province, and if the provincial legislatures voted down the salaries of a minister, they would automatically be thrown out of the office and the working of the directorial constitution would have to be suspended. As these discussions went on for some weeks, two parties crystallized among the political prisoners in the Alipur jail, and they proved to be the nuclei of future Swaraj and No Change parties. In May 1922, the annual conference of congressmen in Bengal, called the Provincial Conference, was held in Chittagong. Mrs. Chitrandan Das was elected president of the conference because of the gallant part she had played in the last year's movement. In her presidential speech, she stated that the Congress might have to consider a change in tactics and suggested, among other things, that the policy of non-cooperation within the legislatures was worth considering. It was not difficult to guess who had inspired her speech and taking it as a feeler sent out by her husband. A storm of controversy was at once let loose all over the country. It was clear therefrom that the orthodox followers of Mahatma would not think of any deviation from the plan that he had laid down before his arrest, and that a stiff fight would take place before the new plan could be adopted by the Congress. This prospect, far from discouraging us, helped us to wipe up our enthusiasm. Thus, Deshbandhu had frequent discussions with his supporters in prison, and he chalked out his future line of action in great detail. Among the measures that he contemplated was the starting of daily papers in English and in vernacular. And out of this future line of action in great detail, among the measures that he contemplated was the starting of daily papers in English and in the vernacular. And out of this speculation came the birth of his paper Forward, which was started in 1923 and soon attained distinctions as one of the leading nationalist papers in India. During 1922, conflicts between political prisoners and the prison authorities took place in many prisons in India. Matters came to a head in two prisons in Bengal, at Barisal and Faridpur. Political prisoners in those prisons demanded decent treatment at the hands of authorities and refused to submit to the humiliating treatment generally meted out to prisoners in Indian jails. The authorities were stubborn and resorted to flogging. But even that could not break the backbone of the political prisoners. Meanwhile, intense public indignation was roused by the news of the flogging. Even the time Bengal Legislative Council was stirred to action, and within the government itself differences of opinion broke out. The member in charge of jails, Sir Abdul Rahim, disapproved flogging of political prisoners, but he could not carry the government with him. As a protest, he resigned the portfolio of prisoners, and which was taken up by the then home member of the Bengal government, Sir Hugh Stimson. After the arrest of Mahatma Gandhi in March, the Congress Working Committee was at loss to decide what to do. Thereupon, a committee was appointed called the Civil Disobedience Inquiry Committee for the purpose of touring the country and reporting on the possibility of starting civil disobedience again. The general feeling among the members of the committee was that it was not possible to start a civil disobedience so soon. But the point that it was difficult to settle was that the Congress should do in the meantime. Should the Congress be content with carrying on its peaceful constructive work, or should it adopt a new plan suggested by the Deshbandhu? The committee made an extensive tour of the country and submitted a report. After some months, the members of the committee were equally divided in their conclusions. Hakim Ajmal Khan, Pandit Motilal Nehru, Mr. Vallabhbhai Patel were in favor of adopting Deshbandhu's plan of entering the legislatures, and Dr. M.A. Ansari, Mr. K.R. Iyer and Mr. C. Rajagopalachari were against it. As the report was published shortly before the Gaya session of the Congress to be presided over by the Deshbandhu Das, his hands were strengthened by the report. Towards the end of September 1922, there were unexpected floods in the northern districts of Bengal. Though floods and famines are of frequent occurrence in the India of today, the floods of 1922 were of an unprecedented unprecedented magnitude. Four large districts of Bengal were affected. Crops were destroyed, houses washed away, and cattle killed. As a result of the floods, there were several cases of death also. The whole countryside was one vast expanse of water. The Congress organization throughout the province promptly responded to the appeal for relief, and I was among the first batch to arrive at the flooded area for the purpose of organizing relief. Thanks to the efforts of Sir P.C. Roy, the famous chemist and the president of the relief committee, and to generosity of the public, a fund of more than 4 lakh rupees were raised. Besides large contributions in cloth, foodstuffs, and fodder for the cattle. On this occasion, the government of Bengal contributed a sum of 20,000 rupees, and in justifying the negligence of the government, the Maharaja of Burdwan, a member of the Governor's Executive Council, stated that the government was not a charitable institution. The relief operations conducted by large public without any aid from the government were so successful that they added greatly to the prestige of the Congress, whose members were largely responsible for them. In fact, we had the good fortune to be complimented on our work by the Governor of Bengal, Lord Lytton, personally when he inspected the flooded areas. Since then, the Congress has always taken a leading part in organizing relief operations on the occasion of floods and famines. Between August and December, two other noteworthy events took place. The first was the meeting of All India Trade Union Congress at Lahore, which was presided over by Deshbandhu Das. In his presidential speech, he made a striking declaration to the effect that the Swaraj he was striving to win was not for a section of the people, but for the masses who comprised 98% of the population. Before and after this meeting, he always took a keen interest in the trade union movement and was for some time the president of the Labour Association of the Tata and Iron and Steel Company at Jamshedpur. The other event was the meeting of the Youth Young Men Conference in Calcutta, which was the precursor of the young movement in the province. This conference revealed the desire on the part of the youth to have a movement and an organization of their own, quite apart from the Indian National Congress. Towards the end of the November, a meeting of the All India Congress Committee was held in Calcutta, at which there was a trial of strength between the supporters of Deshbandhu and of the Mahatma. This was a prelude to the annual session of the Congress. In the last week of December, in an atmosphere of tense with excitement, the plenary session of the Indian National Congress assembled at Gaya. According to preliminary forecast, Mr. Das' plan was likely to be defeated, but no one could tell at the time how the voting would go. It was clear, however, that Mr. Das would have influential support from all provinces, especially from Bengal, the United Provinces, the Punjab, Central Provinces, and Maharashtra. After stormy debates in the Subjects Committee, the matter came up for a voting before the open session of the Congress. Mr. Srinivas Iyer, a prominent leader from Madras, who is the leader of the Madras Bar and had resigned the post of Advocate General of Madras, moved an amendment to the effect that representatives of the Congress should contest the election but should not participate in the work inside the legislatures. On this amendment, the principal voting took place and resulted in a big majority for the supporters of Mahatma. Great was their enthusiasm, and the hero of the day was the Madras leader, Mr. Rajagopalachari, who stood up before the Congress at the obstacle of Gandhianism. The position of Das became rather anomalous. He was the president of the Congress, but the plan he advocated had been rejected. To settle his future course of action, he summoned a meeting of his supporters. It was decided that he should resign the membership of the Congress and organize his party under the name of Swaraj Party. The next day, when the All India Congress Committee met for the purpose of laying down the program of work for the next year, that is 1923, Pandit Motilal Nehru stood up to make an announcement about the formation of the Swaraj Party. The announcement came as an unexpected blow and cast a shadow on the jubilant faces of Mahatma supporters, most of the outstanding intellectuals on the side of the Deshbandhu, and there was no doubt that without them the Congress would lose much of its strength and importance. The announcement first made by Motilal Nehru was confirmed when Mr. Das, in winding up the deliberations, submitted his resignation of the office of president, since he desired to work in opposition to the official resolution with the object of persuading the country to accept his plan of work. The supporters of Gandhi ji left Gaya satisfied at their victory but not happy because of a split that had taken place. The Swarajist party with a sense of defeat but with the determination to fight and win.